I don't know a lot about the Decred.
Kidding about printing.
Flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the bank.
I wish I was more educated on Decred. Decred. He is bullish on Decred.
In this video, we're going to look at nodes and the role that they play in the blockchain system. Now, as new people come into blockchain, they do tend to find it very difficult in understanding how it goes on. Now, in my experience, people won't invest if they don't understand how these things work. It's all very well having the hype and having all of this kind of pumping and dumping and all this fluctuation that really gets people thinking. But ultimately, if you're going to make long-term investments, you have to understand how the system works. So although we're going to look at nodes today, over the next year or so, I'm going to start delving deeper into blockchain networks and see how they all work, see how they differ, and start comparing projects and mechanisms. And as I do my research, as I find out more, I'm going to share it here on this channel for you guys to have a look at my research, but also for you to scrutinize and have these debates about how, what's going on and how they differ and why one is maybe better than the other. So that's what we're going to look at today. So the full node system is something that is very misunderstood, but it actually plays a massive part in the whole system. That's why I figured it's actually quite important to delve into. Now let's have a little look then. So let's go over to the presentation and let's kind of delve into what these nodes do and how they work and everything else. So here we are. The first thing that we have is the fully validating node. So it's an important part of the system, and in my opinion, it's massively undervalued. It's also the heartbeat of a network. Now, a lot of people, when they come into blockchains, the first thing they hear about is proof of work and how miners are kind of keeping these things decentralized and how having massive hash rates is really good for the system. But one of the topics that's not really talked about is if you don't have enough nodes, then it's very difficult to get a decentralized system. And these full nodes are what keeps a system peer-to-peer and what keeps them decentralized. So what I've got here is a little graph, a very simplified graph of how this all works. So in the essence, if you've got your mobile phone and you own some Decred or some Bitcoin or whatever blockchain you have and you have coins in them, really you want to send your money to somebody else in transit of a payment. Okay, so that's pretty much all you see. As a consumer, you just see a send or receive. You're either receiving coins or you're sending coins. If you're paying for something or if you're selling something, or even if you're on an exchanging something. So in its essence, that's really all the consumer needs to know. But if you're an investor and a long-term investor, you kind of need to know that it's this peer-to-peer that makes it so important. So what we have then is a whole load of devices called nodes that download the whole blockchain, and they validate every single transaction to make sure it works, to make sure it gets added to the blockchain. And they also synchronize across all the devices. So the first thing that happens then is you send your payment to your peer. Then the first node receives this payment and they straight away transact this, or they add this to the mempool. Once it's in the mempool, the transaction then gets relayed to all the other nodes on the network to get validated. Once all the nodes receive your transaction, they'll make sure that the transaction fulfills the set of rules to make sure that the coins are yours to spend. Now, once enough confirmations have happened and everyone's happy, then it will get sent off, already in the process, the miners will be gathering a hash to kind of build the next block. And as long as you've got enough verifications, your transaction will then get added to one of these blocks. And once it's in these blocks, it's immutable. And then the process starts again. So the nodes will then download the latest block into their full node, and then they'll start the whole system again. So in this essence, that's pretty much how it works. Now, what's the role of a full node? Now, there are multiple different ones, but in essence, it's this full node that we really care about. And the more people that run a full node, the more decentralized a system is. So the first point of a full node is It adds security to the network by maintaining and running the up-to-date ledger. So every time a miner creates a block, and every time all these transactions are added to that block, the node actually grabs that block and puts it in onto its ledger. And you can think of a block as almost like a page. It's a page of transactions. So once that block gets added, then your transaction is added for full prosperity, and it can never be changed. And that's what it does. So you basically think of these nodes as people that kind of agree with each other that this is what the system looks like. Okay, so they maintain that ledger, that account system. So the next thing, full nodes will broadcast, they will check, and they will validate every transaction and block. They can also reject unwanted consensus changes without relying on third parties. And this is the peer-to-peer thing, is a node doesn't have to trust anything. So it basically validates everything that's happened before. And because all of these blocks have already happened, it can actually just look into its history, make sure that the person trying to spend a set of coins actually has those coins to spend. And then once they've spent them, they just make sure that the person that they're going to has a valid wallet, and they add them to their account, if you like. And that's literally, and they don't have to trust anyone. They just kind of process this, and all the time they're processing and verifying these transactions are getting relayed to all the other nodes. So running a full node helps to keep the network decentralized. Also adds a lot more robustness. So if you imagine this like a big database where the database isn't held in one place, it's actually held in multiple different places. So everyone that runs a full node actually makes it a lot more robust. It actually makes it a lot harder for people to kind of hack or for people to kind of tamper with. The next thing then, so full nodes maintain their own mempool. The mempool is basically a list of transactions that haven't been added to a block yet. The transactions in a mempool are then relayed or broadcast to the whole network. So ultimately, although each node runs its own mempool, eventually pretty much all those mempools will be the same, okay? In the Bitcoin network, it tends to be that the transactions with the highest fees get processed first. In Decred, it's slightly different than that. We don't tend to have full blocks like Bitcoin does, so it doesn't tend to affect us in that way. So we'll have to wait and see if we'll end up going down this highest fee first route. So the next thing, a full node on the Decred network is the equivalent to a main server in the conventional financial systems. This is what I said before about every node being its own server, and it basically, the more you have over the world, the more kind of robust the system will be, the more decentralized the system will be. And then finally, if a full node isn't kept up to date or maintained, it will eventually be forked off the system of the Decred chain and will no longer be able to validate transactions or participate in the network. So that's really important. In order to keep the blockchain running smoothly, it's important that the nodes all run the same software. And it's actually a contentious issue in a lot of these chains that don't have governance. And now Decred, as we all know, has this fantastic governance system. So as we upgrade, pretty much at least, I think it was 60% of the nodes have to have the new software installed before an upgrade will actually happen. And then after a certain period of time, if the other 40% or whatever it is don't upgrade, they will actually get forked off the system, so they'll no longer be able to participate. Now in places like Bitcoin, this actually doesn't happen. Whereas if you can grab that data, you'll actually see that the majority of the nodes running on the Bitcoin system are actually quite old software updates, and they're not all running the same thing. Now, in my opinion, that can cause a lot of security issues. A lot of bugs can enter into the system where things don't get validated properly. So, that's a contentious issue, and you will find a massive debate on that. The Bitcoin guys, they basically say no, we never update. The chain is perfect and it just carries on. But anyone that's been in software long enough knows that this is actually not the case. As good as the code may be from one year to the next, as time moves on, people find ways of tampering with it, or they find ways of manipulating the system. So yeah, ultimately you do want a system to be all pretty much running the same piece of software, and that's where Decred is second to none, where it makes everyone upgrade at the same time. It makes them vote on whether they want the upgrade or not before the upgrade can actually happen. So what kind of nodes are there? So as we talked about before, full nodes add security to the network by maintaining and running an up-to-date ledger. Now the ledger is just basically all of the blocks, and the blocks are linked together by these hashes. So if the nodes have got all of these blocks in, and there's thousands of these nodes, and currently I was looking the other day and there was 250 visible nodes on the Decred system, roughly 250. One thing I did find out is that there's a lot of them running in like an incognito mode, which is interesting. So prospectively, there's a lot more than that, but there's at least 250 that are running in a visible mode, so everyone can see their participation. So the different kinds of nodes that we have the simplified payment verification, SPV. So this is what you're going to find on your mobile phone. So if you're not looking for the most securest experience, and you're just wanting to spend a little bit of coin or hold just a little bit of coin in your mobile wallet for day-to-day use, you're going to be using the SPV. If you want to make sure you're not relying on third-party people, obviously you're going to want to download a full note or a full copy of the ledger. So you could use something like Decrediton to do this. But if you're just on your mobile, it's a lot easier to run SPV because the amount of gigabytes it takes up is going to be a lot less. So you won't have to download the full 5 gigabyte chain to actually do a transaction. So that's the first one, and that's just daily use stuff. The next one is the fully validating node, so the full node. This is the one that I'm finding important today to make sure that we keep the system secure, well maintained and robust. After that, so every time Decred builds a new part to the system, it has to add more nodes. So for instance, we've got the Lightning Network. It has massive development on the Decred chain. And some say it's even better than the implementation that's built on Bitcoin, which is really, really interesting. But if you want to run a Lightning Network channel, you have to first have an active and always running full node. So as well as being able to run the Lightning Network, you're also adding security to the Decred chain, which is absolutely brilliant. The next thing is the voting service provider. So if you want to buy a ticket from a voting service provider, the provider has to run a full node and it has to always be running. If you don't use one of these providers, you have to have an always running full node in order to do your own votes. So that's quite unique to the Decred system. And that's all to do with our governance and making sure that when you're validating a block, you've got your node turned on, or you're using one of these providers. The next thing, which is quite a new node, which is the DCR DEX, which is the decentralized exchange that Decred have just developed, and it's just been released in its first version. It's looking really good. Quite hard to install still, but as time goes on, it will get easier and easier. So if you're running a server or a client currently, you have to run a full node of the Decred chain. You also have to run a full node for the Bitcoin or Litecoin chain. In future, that won't always be the case. They're looking at having SPV implementation now, which should be quite interesting. But currently, if you're participating in the DCR DEX, you're securing the chain as well, which is absolutely brilliant. So those are the different kinds of nodes. Now the next thing is blockchain decentralization and some of the debates around this and how nodes or full nodes fit into this. Now, the Decred chain has a 5-minute block time. It currently has a block size of about 0.4 megabytes per block, and the overall size is about 5 gigabytes, and we're 4.7 years old. Now, Bitcoin in equivalent has a 10-minute block time, has a 1 megabyte block size, and current size of the blockchain was something like 300 gigabytes. Now that's the first debate there. So the block size debate, which if you've been involved in the blockchain space for more than a year or even just a little while, you've probably come across a lot of videos and a lot of documentation about the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and wanting to make the block size bigger, and why that was a good thing or why it wasn't a good thing. So one side of that debate was making it bigger, make sure that the blocks don't get filled, make sure the transactions are cheaper. The other side of that debate was the node debate, really, whereas if you make the blocks too big, the overall size of the blockchain will actually not be manageable for smaller nodes. Now, the problem with this, if smaller nodes can't run a full node because, for instance, it's 600 gigabytes, so you need a terabyte just to run a full node. Individuals can no longer run a full node, which means they're going to be reliant on third parties or big server farms or something like that, which, is obviously going to be a lot more decentralized. Now, before I started looking into full nodes, I hadn't really understood that. See, I'm quite a big follower of Bitcoin Cash just purely because they're quite cheap and it's really fast to transact. And I guarantee that my transaction always goes through really fast. But I hadn't realized that if I wanted to participate in the network, it would actually be really, really difficult. So over time, in 10 years time or whatever, the actual blockchain will become bigger. There's a couple of caveats there. They're talking about pruning and things like that. So eventually you won't have to download the full chain. You can download a pruned version. But ultimately, it is actually a good thing to keep the network as small as possible. Now, anyone that's tried to download a full node on the Decred chain knows that the 5 gig is actually a really kind of nice process. It doesn't block up your system. For anyone that's tried to download the Bitcoin, they'll know that it's actually quite a pain. So the next one that the nodes come into play on is the chain forks. Now, in my eyes, blockchain forks and chain splits are actually a really, really bad thing. Once again, this is where Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, Bitcoin Gold really kind of show their weakness, because ultimately you don't want to make it very easy for a chain to split like that. So you have the same chain running, but it kind of has different channels. And that's what basically happens. If you owned Bitcoin before a chain split, and now you have two versions of that. Good if you owned it, of course. But if you didn't own it, now you're kind of like, oh, which one do I go for, or whatever. And you've got all these early adopters cashing out. So ultimately, you want to make sure that the project that you invest in is kind of chain split resistance or fork resistant. And Decred obviously does a great job of this. And when it wants to kind of upgrade its system, it has a very unique way of doing this through the governance. It makes sure that 60%, I have to check that data, but it makes sure a lot of people have already upgraded their systems ready to go before it switches it on. Now, in the Bitcoin world, you have these debates on Twitter and Reddit and things like that. So you have no way of really finding out if everyone is with you or not until you switch it on. And that was basically what happened. Everyone thought that it was going to go down the route of Bitcoin Cash. And then at the last minute, Coinbase and some of the big players said, no, we're just going to keep it the way it was and call Bitcoin Cash this and whatever. So, you need a way of finding out what everyone wants so that you can keep the chain together. Ultimately, if someone tries to fork off and that doesn't have the support, you do want that chain to die. No ifs or buts. You want the prominent chain to live on. You don't want several hundred forks because it makes the system weaker. All your full nodes get divided. So when you had 100 full nodes, now you've only got 50 or 40 or whatever, So you want to keep that system as strong as possible. It's the same with hash rate for the miners. Once they fork off and they start producing hash rate for the new chain, it kind of dilutes that as well. So ultimately, the longer you can keep a chain running for in its first version makes it more powerful, and it shows that things are working as well. So the next thing is full node incentives. Now, there's a big debate on this. So most proof of work blockchains do not incentivize people running a full node, and the reason for this is because they don't want it to become too centralized. If you look at the mining on proof of work, they have become really centralized. There's just a few people doing all the mining, getting all the rewards. But in terms of the nodes, you don't want that. You want lots of people running, people that believe and want to transact. They run the full node. It's not centralized. Their transactions go through. They add security in a very unique way, and it's good. So from that perspective, I do agree that full nodes shouldn't be incentivized. However, it still costs a little bit of money to run a full node. So you've got to download it, you've got to keep it always on. One way in which you can be incentivized, then, especially on the Decred blockchain, is if you run a Lightning node or a voting service provider node, or even, well, eventually the DCR DEX, once you can run a server, you can be incentivized that way, which is a really interesting way of doing it. So you're securing it, but you're adding a bit of function to it at the same time, which I find really interesting. So there are some projects like Dash that actually have gone down the route of incentivizing nodes, and they call them master nodes. And that has its benefits and has its drawbacks. And as I compare different blockchains, we will look at that. And then finally, very unique to Decred, full node and functionality. So the thing with Decred, which I really like, is every time they develop something, it locks in more security. So for instance, development, security, privacy and functionality are all closely linked on the Decred network. And this is because they're aiming to build a purely peer-to-peer system where everyone at any level can participate. So for instance, when they built in, or they voted on and it passed for the Lightning Network, that added more security. When they did the DCR DEX, that add more security. And as they add all this extra functionality and more people start participating, it will add more full nodes. It will kind of build it as we go, which I find really, really interesting. So that's pretty much it. So just my final thought then. Running a full node gives you the chance to improve the security of the project and also see how easy it is to participate in the system. Remember, the objective is to be peer-to-peer digital cash. Now, if you do believe in a project, be it Decred, be it Bitcoin, be it Bitcoin Cash, be it Dash, whatever, this could be a really a good protocol for you. Get an old piece of hardware, or maybe a Raspberry Pi or something like that, and install a full node. Go through the instructions on that particular platform's websites and install the full node. See how easy it is for you to participate in the system, and that should show you if it's a good investment for you for the future. I like this train of thought because ultimately I want to, if I'm going to invest in something, I want to do it because I believe in it. I want to do it because it actually works. Now, all too often we see all these projects and they're going from £1 to £100 in a day. And you've just got pure speculation going on. What you really want to see is a project going to be there for the long haul? If you've got no way of finding out if a project's going to be there for the long haul, you need to know when to get out. And this is why I like Decred so much, is if I want to look at the value of Decred and whether it's working, they have literally provided me with every single tool I need to make sure I understand how it works. And if I want to participate in a node, I can download it. And it really doesn't take very long. 5 gigabytes of data, a few little following of the instructions, job done. It was really easy. Participation, if you want to see if something's a good investment, try to participate. And I've said this in past videos where the Decred community are so open and they're so willing to talk to you and so willing to kind of interact with you and give you information, make sure that you have the correct education, if you like. If it's not Decred that you believe in, if it's Dash or if it's Bitcoin or whatever, reach out to the people and try these things, see how hard it is to buy the coin, to store the coin, to look at the blockchain, to participate, become a full node. And from that, you should be able to build up a bigger picture. Education's the key. Now, blockchains are a very, very complex thing, and it's our mission here to kind of try and make it simpler for people to understand. So I hope you found that useful. If you like the content, if you want to support the content, give us a like, give us a thumbs up. If you want to talk about what we've just said here, give us a comment below. If you didn't agree with something, give us a comment below. As long as it's constructive, I really like that. If I've missed something or if I've done something wrong, I want that feedback. This is a joint education, actually, at the end of the day, and I appreciate that. And we're pushing ourselves forward. And then finally, if you want to support the channel, you can add a little bit of Decred to this wallet here, which obviously helps me keep running and keep doing this stuff. So I hope you found that useful, and I'll see you next time.
I don't know a lot about the Decred.
Kidding about flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the banking system.
I wish I was more educated on Decred. Decred is bullish on Decred.